Alright everyone, so we got a new fusion coming up. It's a bit of a hybrid and we have a new champion therefore. It's Mavara the Web Diviner. So they're getting creative with the names as usual. But Mavara, she is actually pretty interesting and a really solid champion too. And as usually the question is obviously if you should invest resources for her or not. The whole thing is starting on the 8th of April, so we have another couple of days left. And with that you also have an opportunity to save some resources to actually go for her. But we're going to take a closer look at her, at all the things that we know right now, and just talk a bit about her abilities, talk a little bit about where the use cases that she has, and then we can make a decision of whether or not she's worth going for, always assuming that you have the resources. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, here comes Mavara. So she's actually a really interesting champion. We have a support champion, and one of the interesting things is actually that we now have another reviver for the same faction. So we just had obviously a recent fusion where the same thing was playing out here. And she's a little bit of a hybrid in the sense of where you can actually use her. If you just take a closer look at the aura, we now have a speed arena aura, which is kind of interesting and makes her obviously immediately interesting for PvP as well. And that is also where her passive kicks in. We're going to talk about it a bit later. But the interesting part about her is honestly that when you look at her abilities, I mean, basically all of this is quite useful and she brings a lot to the table here, especially when we're talking about her A1. There are a couple of things here that are super interesting with her. And she's definitely a champion that I personally will go for sure on my main account. And I will even check if on my free-to-play account I currently have the resources that I can get her there as well. So with the A1 it's actually quite interesting because you attack essentially one enemy and you also place a fervor buff on one of your allies for 2 turns. And if you have, for example, several allies already that have a fervor buff, she will go for a different one. The only champion that she cannot place the buff on is herself, but essentially she can buff the entire team, which obviously then makes it interesting for any kind of PvE content where you expect to have a lot of turns, because as the whole thing, the battle progresses, you can get more and more of the buffs on your own team until everybody is stacked, and then you have, of course, the ability with maybe a buff extender on your own side to extend the buff even further, and so on and so forth. So there are actually a couple of really nice tools already around the A1 in and of itself, which makes this super interesting. And the passive that kicks in with the A1, that is where things get really sexy. Because now we have all of a sudden a chance that there is an ally attack in this as well. And that makes it really cool because you can now boost your damage in a lot of the PvE content. When you, for example, think about Chimera, you're thinking about Hydra, you're thinking about the new clan boss, even the old one, you now have an ability to really just get some ally attacks going with just her placing fervor with her A1. And it's actually interesting the way that they're also describing the ability here, because nowhere does it actually say that the fervor buff has to be placed by her. Now we have a couple of tools in the game that can actually help you to place fervor as well, being it relics, so for example Pala from the new faction that would also fit that bill. And then, as I already said, in addition you have some measures like a buff extender that can help you to really keep those buffs up continuously. And if you're thinking about long battles, new clan boss, Chimera, Hydra, old clan boss, even maybe some of the stages that you have a really hard time breaking through, let's say in the Grim Forest for example, that is going to boost your damage significantly. So even her A1 is already a really cool tool. Could technically, of course, also throw Relentless on her, as Gia said. Typically, when you're talking about the rest of her abilities, that might not really be the first go-to, but if your only goal would be to only just get more and more fervor stacks on her, that would be one of the things that you might consider as well, and this can really help you in a lot of the PvE content, so this makes it super interesting. Now, in addition to that, when we're talking about A2, we are getting even more buffs from her. So we now get a strengthened buff, and we also get an increased resistance buff. It's actually kind of funny because if you are thinking about just like what kind of buff she throws out, those are not necessarily two that you would combine together. But I personally have on my account very few champions that have an increased resistance buff. And for some of the Chimera missions, this might be interesting too. And to be honest with you, I think all of the champions that I currently have that have an increased resistance buff aren't really all that interesting just in general. So that makes this another tool that you can use for yourself. And you're also equalizing increasing the hit point levels of all the allies. So this is essentially a heal that you have here on the A2 as well, and you are going to have a 3-turn cooldown on it if you pick it completely. And if you actually paid attention to this now already, she's not really all that power hungry when it comes to books. In total, 8 legendary books is not all that much for legendary support. So this is already a really cool thing to have in your arsenal too. So the fact that there's not that many books that you need for her is also great. Now on year 3 then, we have a revive. You only revive a single ally. Would of course be a lot cooler if you had like a full team revive. But in addition to just reviving an ally, she also has a perfect veil that she places on everybody. And we have an unkillable buff here as well. So she's really putting a lot of buffs out, and it's a really nice tool to have when you're trying to keep everybody alive. We're talking perfect veil, we're talking strengthen, we talk about the unkillable buff here. And this also comes into play a bit with her passive. Because on the passive, for every 8 buffs that the enemy team receives, increases the turn meter of all allies by 20%. Now when you hear something like that, the first thing that you usually jump to is Arena. We talked about the aura a little bit earlier, where she now has an Arena aura, and this is one of those things, if you have a go second team in Arena, if you're not trying to win the speed battle, this makes it quite interesting, because you're going up against an opponent that might just, you know, buff themselves up like crazy, and all of a sudden your own champions get just a turn meter increase, and will very, very quickly start to engage in the battle itself. So this is already really nice to have. And then in addition to that, for every 16 buffs this champion and the allies receive, you get a heal. So she alone is already throwing out a fair number of buffs. In addition to that, you now have a couple of buffers on your team too. Then you're also getting an additional heal here. So the passive that she has is super interesting. We talked about the A1 a little bit. We're now talking about the general passive. And she's really a champion that you can use in PvP and in PvE. So really versatile, just generally how she plays out. For the faction, she's great as well. And I gotta say, right now, this seems like a no-brainer. I mean, I really think that if you have the resources, you should go for her. I will definitely invest into getting her into my lineup. And just the fact alone that we now have, you know, these fervor buffs playing a bigger role, and that we have now a lot of PvE content in the game where the battles last for ages, is going to make this whole ally attack thing that she has going on her A1 more interesting. Then you also have the passive itself, which is going to help you here. So right now, just from the looks of what we know at this point, I would heavily recommend that you are trying to get some resources together so that you can actually go for her starting next week. I think it's next week Wednesday. It's on the 8th when it all starts out. But she seems like a no-brainer. She is all high up there. Everybody is currently raving and ranting about her because this is a pretty cool kit. And especially if you didn't get any revivers in the faction just yet, then in the Dark Elves faction, then this is obviously a really nice tool to have too. So from my end, this is definitely a big recommendation to make a play for her. Now obviously, as usual, you have to figure out, do I have the resources for it? We're going to take a closer look also when the calendar comes out on how the events and everything looks like. But just from the skill set that she brings in, I would say she is absolutely worth it for basically everybody out there. So if you're a little bit newer in your journey and raid and you can manage the resources to grab her, I would definitely recommend that you do. And for everybody else, this is hitting a lot of the boxes. I mean, honestly, she's in some of the aspects a little bit reminiscent of Duchess. Duchess has an AoE revive, which is amazing, but I can still remember that when I had my account early on, my main account, I pulled a Duchess fairly early, and she just carried my account for eternity. And this is a little bit similar. You don't have the same revive power, but you have a lot of very cool buffs for the team. You get the perfect veil here, you have the unkillable buff, you get a strengthen, increased resistance, so all of this is amazing. She can really carry you hard, and that's why, especially for newer accounts, if you can manage the resources, I would very much recommend that you make a play for her, because this is one of those champions that can help you a ton and carry you through a lot of PvE stages in particular that you might otherwise not be able to beat. And then in addition to that, you obviously have late game value from her, you have arena value, so just all around a fantastic champion from the looks of it, and yeah, I'd go for her. Now, again, if you made it this far into the video, make sure that you give it a thumbs up. As usual, if you give the video a thumbs up, your RNG for your next chart pulls increases pretty significantly. I think it's 1% for every thumbs up that you give on the channel, so that adds up over time, so make sure that you take advantage of that. And of course, let me know, are you going to go for her? What is your opinion on her? Do you think she is strong? Do you think that the hype is actually justified? Do you have any criticisms around her kit? Or what's your opinion on Mavara? Guys, drop a comment in the comment section. Thank you very much for watching, and I'm going to see you in the next one. Bye-bye.